We want something new. And of course, the moment, if you do this on Instagram or I'm not on TikTok or anywhere, the moment you click on it, the algorithm will serve you more of these things, either more from the same brand or more from similar brands. So it's very easy to think everyone's talking about this, when in fact they're not.
Over the years, it seems that nutrition advice has undergone some pretty seismic shifts in terms of what we're told is good for us or bad for us or optimal for us. I'm thinking specifically around the whole kind of, fat is bad movement. We've moved into then carbs are bad. We've got people following carnivore diets, keto diets, paleo diets. Ian, why do you think that this is a field, nutrition, in which we see experts of the field admitting, holding their hands up, saying they don't know very much, where the average guy on the street or on social media claims to be the font of all knowledge? What is it about nutrition in particular, do you think, that means that we're constantly kind of moving the goalposts in terms of what is optimal or what is desirable?
Um, Interestingly enough, I don't think the goalposts actually move that much. I think the conversation moves around the center, if you like, because the basics don't change. And that's really important because in many ways, the basics are dull, they're mundane. I mean, who wants to talk about 30 grams of fiber a day when, in fact, most of us don't have anywhere near enough fiber a day? Isn't it much more interesting? And also to not the layperson, but someone who is newer to this, someone who's really excited by nutrition because they haven't, like I have, been steeped in it for the last 24 years. Doesn't mean I'm not excited by it, but I've seen lots of fashions come and go. So the basics stay the same, but the conversation changes. And the conversation can change for many different reasons. It sometimes changes for no reason whatsoever, because one person sees someone else on social media talking about saturated fat. Someone thinks this is a thing. And then it becomes a thing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. For those of us that are more familiar or have our background in print media, and rather than monthlies, but look at the weekly magazine, something like the weekend supplements, the style supplements, the what's in, the what's out. In truth, they're meaningless, but somebody has to write them, and they look around for an inkling, an idea of something changing, and by saying it's changing, they make it into a thing, or at least they contribute to the possibility of it becoming a thing. And that's why those topics come and go and come and go. And after 24 years of doing this, I've seen so many conversations come back where they started and then go through a similar cycle all over again.
So the basics basically haven't changed. It's just people with either an agenda or a different viewpoint are trying to reinvent the wheel, overcomplicate things. What do you think the main reason we have to go out on these limbs and then come back in for? Is it purely a commercial conversation or are other reasons?
I think there's many different reasons. Certainly, there's a commercial element for some people. I think there's an agenda. Social media has changed the conversation in a million different ways. One of the most obvious ways is to get clicks, likes, attention, to be shouty, to make a noise. And one of the ways, the most effective ways to make a noise and get attention is to be a disruptor, or at least to be seen to be a disruptor. To your point about social media and nutrition are a match made in heaven, really, because everybody eats, and also because nutrition information is so widely available that you can get good information. And sometimes, the Dunning-Kruger effect is up and running, which, I've suffered from far more than I should have done in the past, and maybe even today as well. I don't know. But a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And yes, it has a commercial element to it. But there's also an excitement. There's also nutrition is so accessible that people get into it. It's relatable. That if I eat this, does that happen? If I do this, can that happen? I mean, there are certain commercial elements that I really struggle with, which is when nutrition advice is couched as being a hack, as if our body is a machine with an on-off button, that if you do this, that happens. That's not the case at all, but it's lovely. It's very alluring. It's comforting to think that if I eat X, this will happen. And that's not the case.
It seems with health and fitness, that hack mentality or the shortcut is always what seems to drive people rather than enjoying the fact of eating better because you feel better or moving your body because it just makes you feel good both physically and mentally. In all of the people you've worked with over the years and the conversations you've had, why do you think we almost, before we have enough knowledge, we get drawn back into this cycle of hack, shortcut, quick fix? What is it about us that means that this is the solution we first seek out?
I wonder if it's natural impatience, inbuilt human condition. I think it's a potentially reduction in attention span. I think that we've been trained in a different way because to read shorter items. So, for instance, can you imagine when you were writing for a print magazine, having at the top of the page, this is a 7-minute read? You wouldn't think to, maybe one could argue a simple respect to tell your potential reader how long this is going to take. But we want information in smaller bites. We want it in shorter, punchier sentences. Is that because our attention span is shorter? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a bit of chicken and egg as well, because, say things dramatically with an exclamation mark at the end and they become more fashionable and more powerful. And that's what people want, is something that has more, feels like it has more power and more importance.
In terms of the average guy or girl being able to better understand nutrition and some of the things that they're seeing, whether or not it's in the newspapers or social media, I mean, specifically around kind of superfoods or these new life-changing supplements that seem to appear on the market. I don't know why, but in my head, I always think of raspberry ketones. That seemed to be the one when I was first getting into the area that was absolutely everywhere.
Where are we now?
Well, but there's been something else that comes along, and then something else that comes along, and we seem to be caught in this endless cycle of a new superfood or a new supplement. And I wondered, what do you think? I mean, it could be a number of reasons, right? It's journalists meaning well that are misrepresenting the data. It's somebody trying to sell their new supplement range, whatever it could be. But if you're sitting and watching this and you don't want to get caught up in the next craze that has no underlying benefits to it, in your experience, how can someone begin to look through some of these claims? Is it simply a case of if it's too good to be true, it probably is, or do we need to dig a little bit deeper than that?
I'd love to think it was more complicated than that, but it often isn't. Many years ago, I don't know, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I wrote a piece for, it was either Harper's Bazaar or Vogue, one of the glossy magazines, where I blithely wrote the definition of a superfood as any food with a marketing department. And it's true, the same with supplements as well. Now, when it comes to supplements, this is very slightly different because the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, which were the rules that governed health and nutrition claims around nutrition, that's food as well as supplements, were adopted when we left the EU. So there are 200 and something allowable claims, which are very boring, such as vitamin C is involved in the normal maintenance of skin. Nobody wants a normal maintenance of skin. You want fantastic skin. So the nutrients, but those claims are well documented and they're quite modest, and the language is equally modest. There's an on-hold list, and the on-hold list are nutrients that haven't yet been either approved, the specific claim approved, or non-authorized, i.e. rejected. And the on-hold list, you can continue to make those claims until the specific claim, the wording, is either rejected or accepted. And so the on-hold list, we see a lot of stuff on the on-hold list. For instance, the nootropics. So you'll see lots of stuff about mushrooms, and you'll see lots of claims online about, this is marvelous for people with ADHD, kind of sort of woolly claims, making unbelievable health claims. But, they're really appealing. And so a lot of what we're seeing is because the claims haven't yet been authorized or non-authorized. So we have to understand that, they may be true, they just haven't yet been verified. And the other thing to remember, by the way, about supplements is that if you walk into a health food store and there's an aisle with bones, digestion, immunity, skin, whatever it may be, who doesn't want better bones, better immunity, better sleep, better energy? So now all of these nutrients have been themed, for want of a better phrase. No one is going to avoid them because it seems that the nutrients that come in bottles are completely different, have been reborn, and have nothing to do with the nutrients in food. And so supplements, if you like, are the new territory to make claims, which is why I think that we're seeing this cycle of claims, big claims, what haven't yet been verified or otherwise. And it's really appealing. I mean, if there was a supplement out there that's going to enhance your focus, memory, energy, of course you want it. Of course you want it. And there is one already, by the way, it's called caffeine. But we want something new. And of course, the moment, if you do this on Instagram or I'm not on TikTok or anywhere, the moment you click on it, the algorithm will serve you more of these things, either more from the same brand or more from similar brands. So it's very easy to think everyone's talking about this when in fact they're not. So I would suggest that if you're getting your information on social media or it's popping up a lot, it's simply because you're part of the algorithm now. We all are to an extent. But also understand that every time you buy a supplement, you're now entering a different territory. So you take it, sorry, this is a bit long-winded. You start a supplement, it's £35, let's say. No small amount, but big promises. And if it works, it's cheaper, twice the price. You take the supplement, a little bit of a difference. You take a second one, third, fourth, fifth day. It's marvelous. You think it's working. It's not transformative. You're not a different person. You're just a little bit better, but you're not sure. You come to the end of the bottle, you've got 5 or 6 days left, and you've forgotten the impetus that made you buy it in the first place. Whatever that driver was is less apparent now because life's moved on. Maybe you're sleeping better. Maybe it's a little bit cooler outside and you're having a deeper sleep. Maybe you're having less caffeine because you don't get drawn to caffeine, whatever it may be. There's so many possible things that could change. You then get to the end of the can or the bottle, whatever it is. Do you spend the £35 again? And the answer is, we don't know because things change. I use that example to show that life changes in all sorts of different ways. And the answer that we thought came from a supplement or a food, we think that's going to be the primary driver, and it may not be.
Do you think then a good starting point for people, Ian, would be if you are drawn into the appeals of a certain supplement or product you see, to take a step back and remember that they're probably making these claims because they're allowed to do it in this grey area where it hasn't been verified, and just almost remind yourself that these products are allowed to say far more enticing things, unlike food, because it's not regulated in the same way.
Well, funny enough, it is regulated in the same way because of the nutrients, but the nutrients in food are the dull ones: vitamin C, selenium. So, and they are, kind of dull because we know those. I think that when it's new and exciting and it's presented as a disruptor with big claims, of course we should be slightly cynical. But at the same time, they're not thousands of pounds. Try it, invest in it. But best advice I give every client on everything: when you're making a change, before you start something, write out how you feel. Simple things, bullet points. Score your fatigue, your memory, whatever it may be, from 1 to 10, whichever way around you want it. And keep those in mind. And then after 5 days on the supplements or 10 days on the new regime, whatever it may be, go back to it and see how you feel and answer honestly. And do that again every few days. You have no other way of actually quantifying whether your investment is actually worth it.
And it's a great idea that everyone should do, I guess, when it comes to training, when it comes to sleep, when you try and introduce any new healthy or more optimal lifestyle change. I almost said hack there, forgive me. And lifestyle intervention, if you've got some notes, some data, you've got more power to know what's working and what's not. And I think so many people just go into it blind and then don't really know because they've got nothing to measure it against.
There's this, I do feel better, but I don't really know why. And all those other variables come into place as well. And the important thing, this happens with everyone. So let's say you get really annoyed with yourself, you haven't eaten well, you haven't been sleeping well, you're under a period of stress, whatever it may be, and you get sick of yourself. This often happens when, in my sort of thing where I have a new client, they're sometimes really pissed off with themselves. They're meant to do it, and then they've done it, and they kind of wait a couple of weeks. It's like that period after Christmas when you've eaten a bit too much. And, you could stop on the 27th, but why bother? Let's go to the 4th of January and really make myself feel like shit. Excuse my language. Exactly. So what then happens is that we don't change one thing. We get into a mindset where we've acknowledged, we've embraced the fact we want to make improvements. We've acknowledged and understood that we don't feel great, and we have a vague idea of feeling great doesn't feel like this. So we make loads of changes. We go to the gym a couple of times more. We start a different class we've been meaning to do. We drink less. We pay attention to having green tea instead of double espressos, whatever it may be. We don't do one thing because we're in a hurry. So we do loads of things at once, and then we feel better. Feeling better is a wonderful thing. Doesn't really have anything other than a general flavor to it. We can't name what feeling better means. And then bit by bit, those behaviors tend to fall away as we feel less motivated because we feel good. I often say to clients, it's like having dandruff. Bear with me on this. You've got dandruff, you go and get your Head and Shoulders, whatever it may be. A few days later, your dandruff goes. Do you A, stop using the dandruff shampoo, or do you B, carry on? And we know the outcome of both. Well, it's like you don't have dandruff. Why would you need to have a dandruff shampoo? Because the moment you stop, you're going to get dandruff again, possibly. It's a clumsy way of explaining that groups of behaviors tend to happen all at once, and we don't do one thing at once, which makes it even more difficult to quantify that expensive supplement outcome.
Of all the clients you've worked with over the years and just your exposure in this field in terms of nutrition and health and obesity, which I'd like to come on to, why do you think, again, it's human nature to almost wait until we feel at our worst or beginning? Why? I guess firstly, my question is that a common theme with your clients? Have they come to you because they're at a point where they are really, really unhappy, or is it a more broad mixture of people at different stages of their happiness or unhappiness?
It's a broad mixture. It really is. And of course, there are some people who are really hacked off with themselves, and other people who are, have done, there's as many different types of clients as there are different people. And we know there's an endless variation. I think that when I had a big brand, I think there were other reasons that because people thought I was a magician, and I wasn't. I think what I find is that I tend to get, which is something I really like, and I'm very happy about this. I tend to get grown-ups, not necessarily serious, curmudgeonly people, but people who research, people who understand, people who are perhaps a little bit older, who've been through those cycles, who've done Atkins, ketones, keto round one. Some have even done Atkins round one in the 70s. They've done the F plan. They've done all these weight loss plans, and they're not at square one, but they want a little bit of, say, measured, mature response. I make myself sound like a really old man now. I I like that because that's very much my approach, and my approach is always to get the biggest win for the smallest intervention, and that also includes not spending outrageous amounts of money on tests, because tests have their place, but not necessarily in exactly what you're being told the outcome might be. I must have seen 17,000 individual people so far, and I don't know how many consultations and columns and everything else. I'm good at my job. I'm not very good at many things. I'm really good at my job. And one of the problems with that is that I tend to see people twice, understand the situation, work with them, make sure that they have got the tools and the information to do it, check up, fine tune, tweak a few weeks later. Fantastic for them, not so good for my bank balance, because I think it's very respectful to not involve your clients in excess costs and unnecessary costs.
Of those 17,000 people you've helped over the years, is there a common theme in terms of people coming to you with a big thing they're focused on that really they shouldn't worry about? And conversely, something that no one seems to really think about, but is actually one of the big rocks in terms of success? Are there any kind of common themes from all of those thousands, tens of thousands of people you've met where there's almost like a misalignment of priorities versus results and goals?
Yes, I don't know how to phrase this. An awful lot of people will come, as no one would be surprised, for weight management. But when with weight management tends to come better cholesterol scores, lower blood pressure, reduced blood lipids, better blood glucose control, reduced inflammation. And from those other issues emanate potential discomfort and diseases. So they tend to have a better outcome in other areas. But in a way, it doesn't matter which area brings them in. So let's say someone out of the blue has high cholesterol. Having high cholesterol in itself isn't necessarily an issue, but for them, they may not understand it too well. It may be worrying for them, or even a relative of theirs. So whatever the entry point is, this is the marvelous thing about nutrition, is that somebody comes in and says, I'm a bit worried about my cholesterol. My doctor wants to get it down within 3 months because I don't want to take a statin. What should I do? Okay, great. Let's look at your fiber intake. Let's look at your olive oil intake. Let's look at your vitamin D. Let's look at your soy intake. All those things that will potentially not only reduce overall cholesterol, but also protect the unwanted cholesterol or the less favorable LDL from oxidizing. So all of the nuances aren't necessarily important here, because if they have more olive oil, if they have that, make sure they take vitamin D regularly, extra fiber, lose some weight, reduce alcohol, stop smoking, the outcomes will be really beneficial in loads of different areas as well. So whatever the entry point is, sometimes the outcomes are unexpected as well as whatever brought them into the consultation in the first place.
I want to talk now, Ian, about obesity. It's obviously such a huge issue in most of the Western world. And you've spoken before a lot about what I think is one of the most under considered elements of weight management is portion control. How, in this supersized society that we live in, where it's all about, pile it high and sell it cheap, how can an individual get a better fundamental, I guess, understanding of eating for their energy requirements? Because I think a lot of people know typically what the foods they should be eating more of and the foods they should be eating less of. But then the I guess the portion control element of just not overeating for your energy needs is something most people don't really consider. Do you agree with that? Is that something you see? And if so, how do you begin to address that?
I do agree, actually. It's a really interesting point. And one of the biggest issues is actually around calories, obviously. Now, calories feel, and in many ways they are, outdated. They feel old, punitive, because so many people were forced to follow a calorie controlled diet. So it feeds right into the changes that are happening in this moment generally in the world. However, if we replace calories with money, pounds, shillings, and pence, and we replace some of the issues around calories by looking at money instead, it becomes much more understandable, a little less threatening. For instance, many people object to having calorie counts on menus, but if you went into a restaurant and you were choosing between the salmon and I don't know, two different dishes for your main course, and one was 725 calories and one was 525, and you were really torn, the chances are you would go for the 525 calorie ones. Now, some people find this offensive. They say it takes away the joy of the food. Some people who live with disordered eating find it very triggering. All of those things are very valid, but the majority of people may find it useful. Now, if you're broke and you want to go and buy a pair of shoes, and there's one for £725, by the way, whenever I do a Zoom, there's a siren that drives up and down my street. I think just go everywhere. Let's say you're going to buy a pair of shoes, one of 725, one of 525, and one of 195. You like them all equally. Now, you may make the decision based on all sorts of other things. How much money you've got in the bank, how much money you want to spend today. Are they for one occasion? Will you wear them loads of times? Whatever it may be. The same is true of nutrition, calories, and finances. But somehow when you talk about it in a financial sense, people are more comfortable with it. Now, when it comes to energy, what I often do with clients, it feels a bit retro, and we kind of laugh about it, is I ask them to download one of the free apps and I want them to log what they eat. The reason I ask them to do it for free is that I want them to delete it after 3 days, because you cannot lose weight without being in a calorie deficit. And that means food, you can't necessarily eat loads and eat like shit and then, train 8 hours a day in the gym. So it's got to come from the kitchen. So with that in mind, we need to understand what our portion control is about and how much the difference is between one salmon fillet and 2 salmon fillets. I know it's double, but what does that mean? Because if we respond solely to our hunger, which is what we should, that in a marvelous world, we're not making portion control often of our own. It's restaurants, it's takeaways, it's the amount we buy in the fishmonger or in the supermarket, how many pieces in the packet, what the sell-by date is the smelling a bit off? Do I need to finish it today? Again, so many other variables. So once we understand how many calories and visibly what that looks like, then we get a fixed idea and a better idea of how that carries on into our day-to-day life.
So many people, I think, fall into the trap of once they do start thinking more about their calorie intake, using that example just because of the apps that are everywhere now. You can do it just to initially get a better idea of what you're eating. But I've seen it time and time again. People then move too far in the other direction from not giving a monkeys about how much they're eating, but then analyzing every single morsel that goes into your mouth, which is it's really interesting. You say after 3 days, you don't need to track anymore. I think a lot of people don't have that bit of wisdom. So then do tend to care more and more and more and more. And then can very easily get into some sort of disordered eating pattern. How do we find that middle ground, which seems to be quite a small window of opportunity from not caring at all to caring too much? What advice, apart from not counting every single day, can people deploy to have not only a healthier relationship with food, but a sustainable relationship with food for the long run?
I mean, it sounds so blithe and trite to say education. Educate yourself, understand the basics, but then understand human condition, human frailty, and also what's within ourselves. The deleting the app after 3 days, absolutely crucial. It is absolutely crucial. And on that subject, it's very interesting because if we look at glucose monitoring, where big money, you've got this thing here, you've got an app, because of course we all need another reason to be glued to our phones. And now you understand your response to foods. Do you do it for a month? Do you do it for 3 months? Do you take it out after a week when you got hold of it, when you really understood it? It's about understanding it and also understanding one's own capacity to not engage with it as healthily as one might want. Because food is about many different things: enjoyment, pleasure, fuel, sustenance, nutrition, so many different things. I can't think of all of them. And pleasure and sustenance are, should be top of the list. But that list, it's a group of words and reasons that change, and their importance and their relevance change as well. If you are sitting down after dinner with your beloved and you finally have some time for yourself because the workday's finished, children, whatever it may be, some time to yourself, is this a moment to start worrying about your glucose spikes if you have some chocolate? No. Or is it? Only you can make that decision. Or is it a chance to bond and chat over your favorite film and share a future? I don't know the answer to this because there are so many different drivers and so many different things that are important to each one of us. What we shouldn't do is get bogged down with the numbers and the details. But the numbers and the details are important to begin with, because if you know you have loads of insulin spikes during the day because you've got one of these things on, then it should be used to understanding how your body works, to then take it out and go forward with that knowledge, not to rely on it the whole time.
You mentioned they're eating for a number of reasons, and I think, if I'm not wrong, all of them were kind of positive for enjoyment, sustenance. But I think a lot of people eat now. I think probably seeing more since COVID and everyone been working from home. We're eating more because of negative reasons of boredom, anxiety, depression, peer pressure. I mean, there's a number of reasons why we eat when we don't actually need food. Is it important for people to identify, and this is an incredibly hard thing to do to yourself, I imagine, but to identify the reasons why you're seeking out food? Is that the first step for an individual to begin to forge healthier relationships?
I mean, you said need food, and there's also want food as well. I tell you what, let's think about that. I'm thinking out loud here for the go back to the financial model. You want some new shoes. Do you need them? No. You've got other shoes. You want them. And then you might want them because you'd actually like them to wear them to an event or whatever it may be. Then we start using logic to tell ourselves why we want them, all of which is totally valid. If you can afford them and you're not shoplifting, then great, go get them. There's an opportunity cost, obviously. If we're on a budget, I don't mean necessarily even a very limited one, but even on a normal budget, that you could buy the shoes, your life won't change if you buy them or don't buy them. You may have to make one or two sacrifices elsewhere. When it comes to food and nutrition, the sacrifices are the opportunity cost doesn't feel like much. So if you eat extra because you want to, it's comfort food, it's boredom, it's fashion, it's peer pressure. The opportunity cost doesn't feel very real. You may gain a pound or two over a few days, but you can sort that out. I'm making this up. I'm not in saying this is the right thing or wrong thing. The opportunity cost of eating too much or the wrong things doesn't necessarily show itself for some time. And this is why I think a more measured, balanced approach, which is not necessarily in human nature all the time, it gives you an overall better outcome. And you asked earlier on about what clients are looking for. That's what I work with clients, and also my writing and talks and everything else I do as well, because I maybe being a bit older, I don't know, because I see so many I'm definitely older than a lot of my peers, has given me a more measured and long range approach, if you like.
You mentioned with clients that you don't, a barrage of tests aren't necessary. It's much more important to kind of get on with actively helping them through lifestyle choices. But we're seeing continuous glucose monitoring, genetic testing, all these new technologies are rapidly coming down the pipeline that ultimately are going to lead to not only personalized nutrition, but personalized healthcare as well. How excited are you by some of these developments, starting, I guess, with the glucose monitoring software and apps, and also other things you're seeing in this area that could fundamentally transform how we deal with weight management and obesity?
Um, I'm very excited by them. I think the technology in many cases uh, is very applicable. Other technology is really not there yet at all. And I think that, I mean, obviously everything changes and the speed of everything changes is gathering pace as well. Let's take glucose monitoring. I mean, it's not a surprise to know that orange juice will raise your glucose more than an orange. It may be a surprise to some people that having some orange juice after a meal won't affect glucose to the same extent of having it, in isolation. A lot of this we already know, but the technology allows us to demonstrate to a customer or a client. Here it is in colorful graph form on your phone. That gives a great outcome as long as the customer client doesn't become overly worried about this on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to other tests, a lot of the tests are a snapshot. And I think the moving tests like glucose monitoring are much more interesting. They're a snapshot on which the clinician will base some sort of protocol. Now, in some cases, a lot of the tests are superfluous. I see some clients come in having spent thousands of pounds on tests, and they've even been told by their clinician that most other practitioners won't understand this. Don't tell your doctor about this; they won't know about it. I would say at that point, run. Because your doctor does know about it, he thinks it's bollocks. Sorry, I should. I think that there's another element here, which is the more clients spend on tests, the more invested they are in the outcome and more likely they are to be motivated to make the changes. A lot of the tests are not in the hands of the people who know what to do with them and understand the physiological as well as the psychological outcome. I have a friend who's an esthetician, Botox and all of that, who says, there are terrible people in the business, but she puts it, a Ferrari in the wrong hands can be a lethal weapon. It doesn't mean it's not a beautifully engineered, beautifully crafted machine, etc. So a lot of these tests are unnecessary and they're suggested by the wrong people who get a big commission on their test as well. So if you haven't got the basics right, which is your fiber, your macros, your timings, understanding your blood glucose, understanding some basics of nutrition, then all of this stuff is not even icing on the cake. It's sometimes just superfluous and just makes a lot of noise that distracts you from the basics.
So how concerned are you then by the potential upside of these new technologies, which is enormous if in the right hands? Are you very concerned that what we're going to see, what we've maybe historically seen in supplements and other parts of the nutrition and the health and fitness market, that it's going to be used for reasons for people to hoodwink, to trick, all these other things that we've seen before? Are you concerned or are you broadly positive?
I'm broadly positive, but I think I always have a slight concern about that sort of thing. And if you go on, let's use Instagram. If you click on Instagram and look at glucose monitoring, you'll be shown a lot more of it. And also you'll be shown in the feed people that use it, not necessarily adverts. So it'll become more commonplace. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think it has like everything, the potential to be misused, to be missold, to be oversold. And I think that there's FOMO as well. My friends have got one, or other people who I think are really good have got one. I should be doing this. I think, we're, if you like, we're in the Wild West age of nutrition. I thought we were there 10, 15 years ago, and that was nothing because the media, the way things have changed. Social media, fantastic, gives you access to a million different things you never thought you were interested in. Terrible, because it also gives you access to a million things that you shouldn't be interested in, that aren't necessarily going to do you any good. And that's why if you get that education, understand the basics, you kind of, armor yourself to a degree. I am, to answer your question more specifically, very excited by the technology. I was also excited, to be honest, by a Palm Pilot, if anyone remembers those. So, which I spent fortunes on, including a fancy leather cover. I don't know where any of them are. I'd like the money back. My BlackBerry, which was, all of those things, technology moves very quickly. And I think as long as we understand that technology and the outcomes they move quickly, and what you're really invested in now will definitely be superseded. Doesn't necessarily mean that your interest was wrong, or in fact the outcomes will be mitigated.
For me, it certainly feels like there's a hierarchy that should be attributed with the new technologies that are coming. For instance, everyone's got fitness tracking now, but your sleep or your movement or anything else, your calorie burn, it's all being compared to a central database, right? You're the average. How are you doing compared to the average? With continuous glucose monitoring, I think because you've got that real-time feedback, you are seeing exactly what is applying to you, and it offers that first glimpse, I think, of that personalized approach. And I was speaking to Professor Michael Snyder out of Stanford, who was talking about these super spikers, people who will respond with super high elevated glucose levels, regardless of what they eat. And conversely, people who would even eat a chocolate biscuit, a chocolate donut, and still see a very, very small spike. We don't quite know why this is happening. Gut microbiome seems to play a big factor in that. This is my very long-winded way of getting to talk about the gut and how important that is and how little we know at the moment, and just how seismic a breakthrough could a better understanding of the gut microbiome be in terms of, I mean, not just weight management, but I mean, there's so many different ailments, conditions, and currently incurable diseases.
I mean, I think that the microbiome is, there are certain people who are experts, and with respect to them within the limitations that we have in the moment. And one of the ways I explain this to clients is it's like a fruit machine. Okay, now instead of 4, imagine there's 15. Okay, obviously there's a gazillion more when it comes to microbiome. So you've got your basics, you've got your lactobacillus, you've got your bifidobacterium, and you've got those are the family names, and you've got the first and second cousins, and the hierarchy of the head of the family, etc. So, and they could be slightly different, but let's say you've got 3 of those in place, which could be the good E. coli, lactobacillus, and bifidobacterium. And then you've got these ones. And these other ones are additional bacteria. Some may have no influence. They're completely benign at any level. Some may be a little bit active when there's less lactobacillus. But if you've got, I don't know, Citrobacter, and you've got Klebsiella, and you've only got a bit of one. In other words, there's so many variables here. Now, pull the button. What happens with this spread? Okay, so if lactobacillus is a little bit low, or you've got no lactobacillus, which sometimes happens for various reasons. I don't mean in perpetuity, I mean at this moment. How does that affect the other bacteria, and what do they do? What does the combination do? Now, any professor, any expert might say, Ian, that's complete bollocks. You don't know what you're talking about. And I may not. But these are the questions that we don't yet know. We know the basics, though, and those basics are really boring. Fiber, probiotics, prebiotics for those that can handle them, which in many ways is not the limit of our knowledge, but that forms a lot of it. And within that comes variety and amount. So not just the 30 grams, but where do you get your 30 grams from? So, if people are getting those basics right, in other words, getting their 30 grams of fiber a day, getting it from 10, 15 different varieties, sources, then all the variables on the lactobacillus, etc., may be less variable. I don't know. I've no idea. I'm no expert in this, but these are the questions that will be answered. I think that's really exciting. So to use your example of the glucose monitor, seeing it in real time is very different to getting a piece of paper from your clinician, your health professional saying, we've done a test, here's the outcome, and it's negative. Because that doesn't mean anything. Well, I want, you kind of want it to be positive. Seeing that real life changes is going to be a really big driver of change and nutritional change, especially.
A number of people I've spoken to in this field feel that we're very, very close to a situation where, via a combination of genetic testing and stool samples, we're going to be able to identify exactly what's in our gut microbiome and then what should be there, and then populate it with what exactly my unique body needs in that situation. Is that something you feel we are relatively close to? Because it feels to me, and again, I'm listening to people who are very immersed in this field who want that reality to emerge. That could just absolutely change everything. We're all operating on a system where our guts aren't really in a particularly good space. We know how bad that can make us feel physically day to day, but all the inflammation, the other things. Do you feel like, is this a pipe dream, or is this something you're hearing things that we could be very close to?
I'm hearing that it's happening. I don't know. When I say I don't know how close we are, that's not dismissive. Like, I don't know. No idea. It might happen tomorrow. But we have to remember that we know that gut microbiotics, the microbiome changes, and it changes for all sorts of reasons. Now, if human behavior was such that we arrived at the right thing to do and carried on doing that forever, brilliant. But if we've got the gut microbiome, if we fill in the missing things, we remove the things or we reduce the effect of the things that are less positive, and we put everything in place, it's not static. So how do we keep it static? It may be that actually within that, there is a supplement, a probiotic, a something that has exactly what you need to fill in the gaps. But then again, things change. Things change, we know things change because go out and have a bit too much to drink one night, or eat a huge bowl of prunes, and you'll find out how things change. So I'm sorry to be tacky about it, but things change, and so those things that aren't static will require a lot more attention. Now, I'm sure that I'm missing something here, and we will get to that point where we get that personalized probiotic, whatever it may be, and we take it every day that takes into account the strong probabilities of what your gut's all about.
And it feels that that could be such an important breakthrough where we're, again, maybe not too far in the future, but you are doing a simple test daily, whether or not it's blood or it's just through a light monitor that says, right, you need more of this today. And we respond to that. And I think as somebody who wakes up quite often quite tired and would like to have a bit more energy, the thought of just, leaping out of bed each day because our systems are working the way they should. I mean, we've talked about hacks and not using that word, but that feels like the ultimate lifestyle intervention. If you can feed your gut with what it needs, it's not just the physical health, it's the mental health as well.
Yeah, I know. But also on the understanding, of course, that, other things take place, other things, life happens. And, there's something that keeps coming into my mind too, as we're talking, is that we're talking very much about, elite outcomes and people who can afford it, have access to these things. And I was going to say the majority don't or won't. I don't mean they should, but they choose not to because it has no value to them. The opportunity cost doesn't necessarily register with them as something that, why would I spend all of this on a test when in fact I'm saving for summer holiday? Why would I spend all of this on something that has no real value to me? I feel fine. Brilliant, feel fine. So I think we're going to get to a point where we've got not just the healthy and the less healthy, we're going to get the super healthy and the less healthy. And within that, I'm sure, is life extension, understanding more about cell apoptosis, replacing cells, all of those things that some of our Silicon Valley billionaires are busy working on at the moment. And I think, the aim is to make it accessible for everybody, but all early adopters do tend to be people with money. I read about a Silicon Valley billionaire who's having blood injections for, it sounds terrible, using his 18-year-old son, if you like, as a donor for various fluids to actually understand.
Brian Johnson.
Okay, what's going on? I think that's fascinating. It's a bit macabre when I say using his 18-year-old son, but it is interesting. And I think, those early adopters, those curious, and those curious people, I don't mean curious as in weird, those people who are genuinely curious, using themselves as guinea pigs and using their own financial clout to do that. This is extraordinary stuff. And it may be that, the elite, what starts with the elite will filter down to the rest of us as well. And I hope it does, but it's going to be hugely exciting and expensive.
You mentioned Brian Johnson there, and I was fortunate enough to spend some time with him when I was in LA earlier this year. We went to his house and he talked to me through his lab and his gym and his nutrition. Yeah. And it feels like if you spend any time on social media at the moment, and again, this is what the algorithm perhaps is maybe serving me, but it's all about optimization. Everything has to be optimal. There is no excuse for not every single one of your systems running at 100%. And I think nutrition gets caught into that with people being incredibly tribal. It's been said before, the fastest way to start an argument online is to talk about, keto or paleo or anything nutritional, right? How concerned are you by this optimization movement, this biohacking movement, if we want to call it that, in terms of nutrition? Because food is very, very different to the other things we've talked about, right? It's about balance. It's about the social. It's about eating with friends. It's about switch off. It's community. There's all these other factors that don't necessarily apply to staring at the sun or getting into your ice bath in the morning. Are we in danger of thinking about nutrition as another box that needs to be ticked from an optimal point of view?
Yeah, I think so. And I think so because in amongst all of those other things, food has got attributes and possibilities that The other areas have, but nowhere near to the same degree. I mean, yes, you could argue that training, whether that's weight training or a rowing machine or spin or whatever else, has a community aspect to it. And it brings all sorts of psychological benefits from mixing with other people, conversations, whatever. Doesn't match to food. I mean, the fetishization of cooking, cookery shows, baking shows, the interest in food, the way that food, some people it defines us, some people it explains us, gives us an identity. And if you take that into the tribal element that you rightly pointed out about keto, fasting, whatever it may be, it's very, very nuanced and very complicated. And I think, if we look at Instagram, take that as an example, and you look at something like Mark Wahlberg's regime, getting up at 4:30, training, etc., and super successful, etc. Now, somebody might look at that image and that life and go, I should be doing that if I want to look like that at his age. I think he and I are a similar age. Great. But then you might look at something on Instagram of, a pretty garden in the summer with a table laid and some gorgeous flowers and a lovely tablecloth and nice, attractive looking people laughing together and having a good time as they photograph their salads. I want both. So, one seems to be a sacrifice for the other. And I think that one of the things about food that is easy to lose is the pleasure of it, the taste, the flavors, the sharing, the pleasure of cooking it together, the pleasure of eating it together, the pleasure of asking people what they want to eat, the pleasure of actually providing for somebody. There's so many aspects to it, which is why, if you like, food sometimes gets separated from nutrition, which seems cold-hearted, clinical, there to be hacked. Whereas food is about something completely different, and they're not.
If you do spend time on social media and you're interested in health and fitness, it feels like everyone's talking about nutrition. Everyone's got a diet that they're wedded to. Yet if you walk down any high street in the UK, it's clear that most people aren't really thinking about what they're eating. Which brings us on to the subject of obesity. It's a huge issue, both adult and children. And I'd be really interested to get your take on, how do we fix this? How do we begin to fix this? Because it is such a huge issue, and there's studies that say that overweight kids struggle with attention, they perform badly in tests, they have less positive health outcomes in later life. It's a huge issue that society we need to address. Where do we begin? Is it as simple as it's about education? It's about investing in resource in teaching kids, because we can't necessarily expect parents who are set in their ways to change.
I wish there was one answer. I mean, it's almost as if the entire system needs to be changed. I am quite torn about this, because the food industry is blamed as if it's one. I had a food company for years. I worked for other food companies as well. They're commercial organizations, and as a libertarian, I feel that they're allowed to make food and sell them. But never worked for a food company that produces rubbish food. Every food company that produces second-rate food, I don't mean poor quality, but loads of sugar, whatever it may be, will tell you there's no such thing as a bad food, only a bad diet. But the food culture needs attention. Food manufacturing needs attention. Understanding that food is a huge industry, provides jobs, income, and as we saw through COVID, feeds people. It is such a vast problem that we almost need to dismantle society and start again if we want to even get anywhere near addressing this. The issue that is a very, very difficult one, because of course it's so nuanced, and is personal responsibility, because our personal responsibility is there, and how big a role our personal responsibility will change daily, and will change according to what our personal circumstances are, which may change next week. It also comes down to our positivity and how we feel about life. Someone who lives in a setting in a part of their country that's not beautiful, in an awkward family background, I'm really, really generalizing this, so don't come at me, may not feel quite so positive about life, and feel that the vibrant colors of a beetroot and burrata salad are going to make much difference. Nor do they have the access, the interest, the energy to do anything about that. And so it's much easier to get a takeaway, which of course is good value, still gives you energy, still gives you some nutrition, because the opportunity cost of not eating in one way isn't felt now. And even if it was, some people are just not that motivated. So I don't know the answer to this. I know that it's multifactorial, and I think a lot of governments blame the food industry because they're an easy target. But I think we all, every part of life, needs to be looked at the same time as some sort of larger approach. I can't see it happening, would you?
The issue again in terms of deprived parts of the UK, it's not only the perception that I don't think it's even necessarily that health food or fresh food is more expensive. There's research that shows it's generally not available in part, in certain deprived areas. They just don't stock that kind of food because, chicken and egg, no one's buying or it's too expensive. These are the kind of issues that it's not enough for an individual to take responsibility, because they might have to go miles out of their way to get the right kind of food they know they should be feeding. So are there any shortcuts here? We've talked about ultimately the responsibility has to fall on the individual because no one else is going to
Yeah.
their part.
Who's going to do it for you?
But are there any easy wins that you feel that government or any other respected body is missing in terms of making that fight a little bit less one-sided?
I don't know that. As I said before, understanding the basics is really important. Understanding that, let's look at protein, the role of protein, the way that protein breaks down more slowly to provide energy than simple carbohydrates. Simple hacks like that is try and increase your protein. Doesn't have to be organic chicken. Baked beans are protein as well. Cut down on your sugar. Combine fiber with protein will help reduce your appetite, give you energy for slightly longer. All of these things are important, but only as part of a bigger picture. I think that with politics as they are, and with identity becoming more and more important, any one person suggesting to another person to do something can be misconstrued and taken for, you should be doing this. And I think we're culturally, I don't know that there's much we can do about it at the moment. That's a very poor answer to a very good question, because I don't think there is much to be done. That sounds really hopeless. But my worry is, and I don't know how to fix it, is that the elites will continue to do well and do better. And that group of people will expand as nutrition and good nutrition becomes more and more available to people with money. And I think that the haves and the have-nots, well, the divide, I'm afraid, will stay. I can't think of a way out of it.
In terms of investment in education, to me, something that could be done would be a greater emphasis on both physical education at school and also the nutritional education. And Martin Lewis, the money saving expert, is always banging the drum about being financial education, because we all leave school at 16 with absolutely no knowledge of how to budget or how to balance income and outgoings. And I feel the same is missing from a nutrition and physical education point of view. It's, you're seen to do almost exercise as a bit of a punishment, or certainly that's how it seemed back in my day, and we are going back a few years here. Whereas teaching kids the mental and the physical benefits of exercise, alongside the importance of eating, the variety, all these other things. How big a jump start could we get by, if you could wave your magic wand and making changes to the educational system? Is this the first thing you do?
I mean, I think I totally agree. Financial education, nutritional education, physical education, nutrition and physical being separate, by the way. I think it's often seen as the same thing. And they're clearly not. I don't just mean, so there's physical, cooking, nutrition, exercise, financial, if only. And I think that it will almost take a commercial organization to start bringing those things into school at the behest of the end users, which is parents, school trusts, etc. I just don't know. I'm too stupid, frankly, to work out how that's possibly ever going to happen. But what's interesting is that I do lots of talks in schools, and I'm a patron of a school charity as well. And when I go along and talk to the schools and for youngsters right up to mid-teens, whether it's focusing on energy for exams, whether it's focusing on basics of eating, what I'm amazed at is and I say this lovingly to all the schools who have kindly asked me to come in, is how do your 15-year-olds not already know this? How do your 12-year-olds not know what a protein is? How do your 9-year-olds not understand anything about this? I mean, even the basics, because I don't know what's on the school curriculum, and I think it's very easy to bash government, plural, and to say that they're all wrong. But how if these things aren't understood and the value of them isn't understood and acknowledged, then we are in many ways consigning youngsters who don't have that education or come from a family who have personal interest, tend to be middle class and moneyed to some extent. We're potentially increasing the chances of them to have poor energy, poor outcomes, poor exam results, liver obesity, all of those things for longer periods of their lives. It's deeply, profoundly unfair.
I've spoken to a lot of people about obesity, and you won't be amazed to hear that no one has a particularly good or concrete answer of where we can begin. The one thing that almost everyone I've spoken to has in common is that nobody thinks fat shaming is the answer, and nobody thinks fat acceptance is the answer either. But we've seen a huge rise of the healthy at every size or health at every size movement. What's your take on that movement and how it is either helping or hindering the conversation around obesity?
I think if we separate what goes on from here upwards and from here downwards, if let's talk about fat shaming. Telling someone they're fat is it's cruel and pointless. They know. I don't even like saying they're fat because it sounds almost like a pejorative and accusatory term. Telling someone they're overweight is pointless because they know, they've noticed. And they huge generalizations. Fat acceptance is you're easing someone's distress about a situation they could do something about. I think health at any size can be achieved to a degree. That doesn't mean that you can pretend that you're if you have a BMI of 30 and above, that you are not at serious risk of conditions further down the line. But let's say someone's 32 years old. They don't know how they're going to feel at 60. This all feels a way off. And doing something about it now doesn't necessarily they don't have much impetus to do something about it. I worry about the healthy at any size, simply because it's generally taken up by younger people who, and advised by younger people, often part of a social movement. Nothing wrong with that. Empower each other. Go for it. But you won't find someone so easily who's 60-something, who has struggled with type 2 diabetes that developed in their 40s and 50s, who had a terrible time during menopause or awful testosterone levels, whatever that may be, which is potentially linked to being, a BMI of over 30 in their 20s or 30s, whatever it may be. If you ask them if they could go back in time and change what they did, I don't know what they'd say. Some would. I'd like to think many would, but, all of these things are the benefit of hindsight and age.
We've never been in a position where information is so readily accessible and shareable with social media. But if you talk about diet culture or nutrition advice, it doesn't take long before someone will point the finger at you, making an accusation of an agenda or fostering food, body shaming, whatever it might be. As someone who's been in the industry for so long, Ian, has got so much experience and so much to contribute to the conversation, what's your relationship with social media? Do you want to contribute? Do you decide you made that conscious decision? Actually, do you know what? It's easy just to...
I used to be very busy on Twitter, and I'm less busy on Twitter now because, as you say, post something innocuous and see how long it takes before somebody accuses you of something really hideous. And it's not that I'm thin-skinned. I'm a bit thin-skinned about some things, but I have energy that I don't want to spend on that. And when it comes to Instagram, I have fewer followers than most people's kittens. And it's partly because I cannot reconcile, I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, as a 59-year-old staring into my phone and saying something inauthentic. I've had so many questions about vitamin D today. No, you haven't. Or buying followers, or as I see so many of my peers do, and which is, there's something really inauthentic and troubling about that. And I'm not putting, maybe it sounds like I'm creating some sort of moral superiority. My attitude towards social media is it confuses me. I should do more. I haven't yet decided how to do that. I don't want all aspects of my life on show, but nor I do find that when I post, I'll give you an example. If I post a picture of me, even at this age, I'll get 250 likes and lots of people saying nice things or not. If I post a nutritional something, then nobody's that interested. So, and I know we're running out of time, but I'll give you one more example. There's a personal trainer who I know well, I'm very fond of, who has got 50, 60, 70,000 followers now. I think when he and I had this conversation, he was about 55,000. And he couldn't monetize his social media. The idea of monetizing my social media, by the way, I'd make about 8p a year. And he couldn't monetize it. And he simply couldn't understand why. Lovely fellow, hadn't quite really understood what he was doing and why some posts got more. And the simple thing is that when he trained and showed a picture of him with his shirt off, he would have 1,000 likes. When he showed, you were nodding because it's so obvious. To him, it wasn't. When he had a nutritional nugget, when he was fully clothed, nobody was interested. It's visual. And, if you watch youngsters, they literally flick through their screens. They hardly engage. If they're following somebody, there's a section of social media users. If you're following someone, it's swipe like, swipe like, swipe like, without engaging. So I'm trying not to engage too much to get their attention, because it doesn't mean much. And the question I always ask myself is, if you're going to do something, to what end? And I do that about nutrition posts, the work I do, who am I helping, who am I engaging with? Am I doing this right to reach the end user and make a difference?
It feels like such a missed opportunity to me, though, because we're now facing a situation where people such as yourselves, who've got enormous wisdom and experience in the industry, aren't engaging, aren't sharing their information because simply you don't need to. Whereas on the other side, you've got people who absolutely have to make social media succeed to them because that is their thing. They need to make it work. So they will chase whatever they need to keep those likes coming so they can monetize it. So we're faced with a race to the bottom, for lack of a better phrase, where we're just going to get more and more of the stuff that maybe doesn't help, or it's someone giving information in a bikini or their swimming trunks because they look the part, forget what's going on behind the scenes in terms of performance enhancing drugs and eating disorders. Whereas the people who have actually been there, and I say this with utmost respect, have done the hard yards through the course of a career, there's no incentive, there's no motivation to contribute. So you keep quiet, and then the general level of understanding or engagement or conversation ultimately will go downhill. I'm not trying to twist your arm to get.
No, I twist my arm with pleasure. I definitely understand that I have the potential to not engage and use my experience as I could have done. And I keep meaning to do something more about social media and not post photograph of me on a beach going, isn't it marvelous? Because nobody's interested, least of all me. And I think that it's developed a thick skin, and so I need to stop being a bit of a Luddite. I need to engage more. And thank you for your kind words. I'll use that as some sort of impetus.
But it must feel a little bit like a thankless task. And I'm saying that in relation to a number of incredibly well-known UK food influencers on Instagram, and having spoken to people behind the scenes, many of them have been in clinics for disordered eating patterns or eating disorders. And I kind of struggle sometimes thinking about a lot of people coming to this information without any knowledge or experience, taking everything at face value. And that to me feels like a very unhealthy relationship. And again, I don't know what the answer is. So I'm not sure where this question is going, to be honest, but it feels like we're really missing a trick on something so important in terms of its information now being given in a primary way, not coming from I don't want to say not a good source, but you know what I mean, a source with issues, to a desperate audience who don't really know how to separate the right from wrong.
I think there's a very influential individual, I won't say too much, who's got 1 million followers now, who has their own brand of supplements, and now cleverly weaves references to their supplements making all the difference into everything. And so well done them. I mean, really well done them. If that's what they want. I'm not saying, I sound very morally superior to say I couldn't do that. And that's not to say I can't be bought. If there's 20 million quid in it, I'm up for it. But if it's I want to be able to sleep at night, so I want to be able to make a difference with authenticity and a degree of doing it kindly, correctly, and not just shilling the public because I want to do the right thing, and I haven't yet found how that will translate to social media because I'm not flogging anything.
We've talked about education, and what just wanted to finish on the last point of when it comes to education. I think a lot is played of how we can better educate young people and their parents and the older generation as well about how to eat for better health and better health at longevity as well. So you can live a longer life in the best possible condition. But do you think fundamentally most people at heart, if they're honest with themselves, know how to eat? Are we overcomplicating this by thinking, oh, it's very difficult to know what to eat? Do you think most people fundamentally know, they just don't want to eat it for, and again, not apportioning blame, but for whatever reason, just decide not to?
Well, let's go back to just that point about what food means and what it represents, flavor, sharing. There's so many things that would take forever to list them. That if the outcome meant something to somebody now of eating badly for prolonged periods of time, you'd like to think they wouldn't do it. And that outcome doesn't mean anything to us now, simply because human beings have the capacity to forget. I'd say this with no knowledge whatsoever. If people remembered pain, no woman would ever have a second child because we don't remember pain, we don't remember discomfort. And so we can only vaguely imagine what it feels like to be 65 years old with a health condition that we could have avoided because we don't know what 65 feels like, etc. We don't, human beings are blessed and cursed with the same thing, which is to live more in the moment, etc., etc. And we also live in plentiful times, despite what anyone might think. We have freedom, we have choices, and if your freedom and your choices mean that you're going to really indulge in food and really enjoy it, that's your choice. If it comes down to education, then it would be lovely to think that everyone makes those choices fully understanding what the potential outcome would be. But I don't think that's possible.